Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 25. Limbo. Harry pulled the invisibility cloak over himself. Atem understood. He really did. Had he not himself used a disguise to make sure none of the people that cared for him stopped him? Therefore the Pharaoh did not comment. He just followed, a silent comfort to Harry. Atem was not particularly worried that his presence would halt anyone. Most of the people still shunned him like the plague. The castle was abandoned. Most people were probably in the Great Hall taking care of those they had lost. Atem clenched his fists almost unconsciously, trying to ban the mental image of all the dead. Tracy and Dean, Lupin and Tonks and Luna. It was all too awful. It wasn't until they reached the entrance hall that they saw people. Harry was tempted to look that way, perhaps catch a glimpse of Hermione and Ron. Or Ginny. Or anyone else he cared about. Atem put a gentle hand between his shoulders.
Looking back will only make it harder. Of course, the choice is yours,
he whispered and kept his hand discreetly on Harry's back to make sure that he knew where Harry went. Harry sighed and did not reply. He knew the ancient king was right. He could tell by himself that it would make the task impossible, so he just walked forth, not looking even remotely in the direction of the Great Hall. Professor Muto! Someone called out, doing the exact thing Atem had hoped wouldn't happen. Not to mention that the only people with the courage to do that tended to be Harry's friends, and indeed the owner of the voice was Neville. He and Oliver Wood were carrying yet another of the many dead from the grounds towards the Great Hall. I'll take him alone, Neville, Oliver Wood said, eager to get away from the spirit. Atem let his crimson eyes fall upon the lifeless form of Colin Creevey. He sighed and closed his eyes as Wood left them.
Neville,
Atem said as a means of greeting. Have you seen Harry? Neville asked, taking Atem by surprise. The Pharaoh, although surprised, did not even flinch.
Yes, Neville,
he said truthfully. Once again, he did not flinch when he felt a foot coming down on his toes. The truth was that Harry's somewhat harsh warning was unnecessary. Atem knew what he was doing. He did not go to give himself up, did he? Neville asked, horrified. You should have stopped him! Atem had to admire the boy's courage.
You make it sound as if I could have,
he said with a weak smile. Then his expression turned more severe.
Neville, no one simply walks to their own death. It goes against our native nature. If he is going to give himself up, there is probably more to it than simply trying to protect us.
What do you mean? Neville asked, distrusting.
I mean that you should have some faith in the choices he makes,
Atem said and cast his eyes to the ground.
There is always more to it.
Not to speak ill of him, but Harry has made some really stupid decisions, Neville said, his tone a mixture of horror, grief, anger, and exasperation.
Just have some faith, Neville,
Atem said.
This will all end soon.
Then he walked away, leaving Neville rather unsatisfied and livid. We won't stop fighting, even if Harry dies, he yelled at the spirit.
Don't you think he doesn't know that?
Atem said, and looked at Neville, who, at those words, looked rather crestfallen. Then Atem continued his journey towards the forest. He took the lead as they walked through the entrance hall, but slowed down when they reached the grounds, allowing Harry to take the lead again. When they reached the edge of the forest, Harry stopped. There was no question as to why Dementors were housing the tree line.
I'll take care of them,
Atem whispered. No, Harry whispered to Atem's surprise. I know what I need to do. Harry took off the cloak, hung it over his shoulder, and started grabbing around in the pouch around his neck. He conjured a snitch. Atem recognized it from the few Quidditch games he had seen. Why would Harry need one of those? Harry pressed the golden medal to his lips and whispered, I am about to die. In the light of the wand Harry had lit, Atem could not really see what happened, but his best guess was that the snitch parted into two parts. The two bits fell to the ground, and Harry seemed to look at his hands, or more accurately, what was in them. In the light of the wand, it appeared to be a small black stone with a symbol carved in it. Then Harry turned it 3 times. Atem did not really know what to expect, but it wasn't what happened. The first 2 people he saw appearing were a man with glasses, a spooky resemblance of an older Harry, accompanied by a woman who had the exact same eyes as Harry. They were his parents. Then a man Atem recognized appeared, Sirius Black, he who had died in the Ministry of Magic. The last one to appear was Lupin. The werewolf looked a lot better in death than Atem had ever seen him alive. Not that the 2 of them had had a lot of encounters. All 4 of them carried warm, loving smiles turned towards Harry, who carefully looked up and opened his eyes. In quiet wonder, he studied them. What's going on? Yugi asked, his confusion clear in his voice.
You can't see them?
Atem asked, surprised. How could anyone not see them? You've been so brave, Harry's mother said, her tone witnessing of how proud she was over her son.
You are nearly there,
Harry's father said.
very close. We are so proud of you. I had help,
Harry said, and looked at Atem, who was tactfully looking elsewhere, but also deep in thought, trying to figure out why in the world Yugi could not see the figures Harry had brought back from the dead. He was not even aware that they were talking about him.
He says dying doesn't hurt,
Harry whispered.
He's right,
Sirius said.
faster and easier than falling asleep.
Auntie Will wanted to be quick. He wants it over with, Lupin said.
I didn't want you to die,
Harry said. These words came without his volition.
any of you. I'm sorry.
He addressed Lupin more than any of them, beseeching him.
Right after you'd had your son. Remus, I'm sorry.
I am sorry too, Lupin said. Sorry that I will never know him. But he will know why I died, and I hope he will understand. I was trying to make a world in which he could live a happier life.
Today's people will cross rivers of blood and carry their sins, so the next generation can live in happiness and peace.
Atem repeated, recalling his conversation with Raphael. Lupin turned to Atem and nodded. Yes, exactly.
You'll stay with me?
Harry asked.
Until the very end,
James said.
They won't be able to see you?
Harry asked.
Way up all to you,
Sirius said.
invisible to anyone else. But then, how can you see them?
Harry asked the ancient king, confused. Atem shrugged.
I can see them, but Yugi can't.
Then Lily Potter turned towards the Pharaoh. We'll join him from here. Thank you for bringing him this far.
I'm proud of you, son,
A dark voice said, and Atem looked up, alarmed. He knew that voice, but it couldn't be. Couldn't? An additional figure appeared among the dead, dark skinned, tall and muscled with black hair and beard, wearing the clothes that had been suitable for his position.
Father!
Atem called out, shocked. What? Yugi called out, who felt blind, but his partner ignored him.
This is not your war, yet you chose to abide them. You are a good man.
The late king smiled with affection, and Atem felt a lump building in his throat.
This is your father?
Harry asked, seemingly only half aware of what he had just asked. He had dropped his jaw as he stared at the man who claimed to be Atem's father. It was one thing knowing that Atem once had been Pharaoh. Seeing his father in the appropriate clothing was a completely different thing. It made the spirit of the puzzle a lot more real, somehow. Atem nodded, still dumbfounded. The last time he had seen Akhenaten Khanen had been during the game Zorg's priest had challenged him to. The man stepped forward and put a gentle hand on Atem's shoulder.
I know this is hard on you. You two will be allowed to join us. Your time will come.
Atem was left speechless, and Akhenaten Khanen could tell, so he turned to the young man his son had led this far.
You two are a good man. What you are about to do is not easy.
You need to remember that the choice is yours, Lupin said. You do not have to.
But I will,
Harry said, and Sirius nodded with pride. He smiled brightly. Then Harry turned on Atem, who was still looking at his father with an odd mixture of emotions on his face.
Atem,
Harry said, calling upon the Pharaoh's attention.
Thank you, but you can't come any further.
Atem nodded.
It was an honor knowing you, Mr. Potter.
I've had my doubts, but you're okay.
Absolutely mad, sure. But alright, you certainly made things interesting,
Harry said with a half-hearted grin. He held out a hand, which Atem accepted.
There is a snake, Harry said. Her name is Nagini. She's Voldemort's pet snake, very large. She must die. As long as the snake lives, Voldemort cannot die. He keeps her close right now, but do anything you must to get that snake dead.
Atem frowned, but nodded.
I shall.
Then they let go. The same moment their hands lost connection, Akhenaten Khanen started to fade away. Atem understood why he could see them and Yugi couldn't. He was already one of them. He was dead, he belonged with them. Therefore, he could see them.
Stay close to me, Harry said quietly and looked at the people surrounding him. Atem started to back away, walking back to Hogwarts. Harry went the other way, step for step deeper into the forest, closer to death. There was a clear difference between being accompanied by the man who had made this journey before and being accompanied by the dead, the people he loved so much. The difference was so vast that he could not tell which one was to prefer. The only thing he knew was that he, in the end, was surrounded by his loved ones when dying, and that he would never have had the strength to venture the last little bit into the forest had it not been for the ghosts that were with him. Step for step, he himself was not really conscious of what he was doing, of where he was going. He just walked. He was not particularly worried about where he was going, convinced he'd end up where he was supposed to anyway. He had covered himself with the invisibility cloak again, simply because it felt right. When he saw Dolohov and Yaxley looking for him, however, he was rather grateful he had made that decision. After some contemplating, Yaxley and Dolohov returned, and Harry followed them. The two Death Eaters would lead him straight to his end. Had it not been for the presence of the four ghosts, he'd probably have turned around and fled. But he didn't. Like Harry had foreseen, Yaxley and Dolohov took him straight to Voldemort. He recognized the place where Aragog had lived once. The remainders of this giant web could still be seen. Close to Voldemort was Nagini. Harry's eyes rested upon the snake, much in the same fashion as Snape's had. But he, too, would not be able to finish her. He'd leave that to Ron and Hermione, or, more likely, Atem. Harry was surprised at how small the amount of Death Eaters who were with Voldemort was. Where were Mulcible and Travers, and all the others? The Malfoys, Bellatrix, and several others were there, though, looking wary. They all knew the hour was coming to an end, and he hadn't shown up yet. Voldemort stood with his eyes closed, waiting. When Dolohov and Yaxley rejoined the circle, Voldemort looked up.
"No sign of him, my lord,"
Dolohov said. "I thought he would come," Voldemort said in his high, clear voice, his eyes on the leaping flames of a small fire in the middle of the clearing. "I expected him to come." Nobody spoke. They seemed as scared as Harry, whose heart was now throwing itself against his ribs as though determined to escape the body he was about to cast aside. His hands were sweating as he pulled off the invisibility cloak and stuffed it beneath his robes with his wand. He did not want to be tempted to fight. "I was, it seems, mistaken," Voldemort said.
"You weren't."
The words were spoken. He had made his presence known. There was no running from death now any more. It reminded him of the time before he came to Hogwarts, when his gym teacher had forced him to jump off the 5 meters high springboard. To take that one step out into nothing, that had been the hard part. After that, he could only hang on for the ride. That was what he was doing now, simply allowing it all to happen. The resurrection stone slipped from his hands and fell to the forest floor. His parents, Sirius, and Lupin all disappeared.
"No! No! Harry! Where are you?"
Harry turned. His eyes that had been transfixed on Voldemort, and Voldemort alone, were drawn to the large person calling out. Hagrid was tied against a thick tree. The branches shook as Hagrid struggled. It seemed that between the two of them it was Harry, and not Atem, who had drawn the longest straw. He did not have to do anything alone. Not dying. Nothing. The only one he could feel sorry for now was Hagrid. "Quiet!" Rao yelled at Hagrid, and with a flick of his wand, Hagrid fell silent. All Harry could do was send Hagrid a reassuring smile that was not received very gladly. "Harry Potter," he said very softly. His voice might have been part of the spitting fire. "The boy who lived." Harry swallowed. He would think of everything but what was about to happen. He thought about Ginny. He thought about everything with it that was good. He'd join his parents, Sirius and Lupin, Luna, Dumbledore, Dean, and Tracy, and he knew that if he got the chance, he'd go visit Professor Muto's friends. He did not know what the afterlife was like, but if it would allow him something like that, he would. Same went for Snape. If he could, he'd have a very long conversation with the teacher he had loathed for so long. All those thoughts, it made it almost bearable. He saw Voldemort's mouth move and a flash of green light, and everything was gone. "Are you quite certain of this?"
Dean asked. Of the four of them, it was he who was most doubtful.
Of course I am,
Tracy said with more conviction than she actually felt.
It means we'll be together, right? It'll certainly be something out of the ordinary.
Dean shook his head.
They killed us for this exact reason, and we're just going to do as they want.
Your statement is not really correct,
Rebecca said, looking around herself uncomfortable. She had been in this place before and made the exact same choice Dean, Tracy, Luna, and Cho were about to make.
Those that killed Luna and Joe were fiends, locked away in the shadows for a reason. The ones you would be helping would be those who have protected us from them. It is true that for this exact reason they did not protect us to begin with, but most of them never would actually kill for this. That is why the dominion of the beast interfered. Is it just us, or are there more who will be asked?
Cho asked.
Only those they deem trustworthy and capable of making just decisions are asked, Rebecca said. You know what awaits if you make that choice, but the choice is yours entirely. If you want, you can move on.
Sir Nicholas talks about returning as a ghost as an act of weakness, Dean said with a frown. He was not afraid of death, especially not now anymore, not that he really was dead. Becoming a ghost, however, was something that left him rather skeptical.
I know,
Rebecca said.
They also told me that. It is commonly considered as an act of cowardice to use your magic in order to remain as a ghost. They are not held in very high esteem. But this, I can assure you, is not an act of cowardice at all. Quite the opposite. It is completely new, an act of desperation if you want. There is no telling what will happen to any of us.
Why are you telling us this and not them?
Dean asked and crossed his arms. It pleased him to know that even in death his limbs remained.
Have you noticed from the start?
Rebecca shook her head.
No, I just found out myself. It is also not the reason they let me die. My death served a different purpose. But even me they asked to remain for this reason, although they didn't tell me that.
So they withheld information from you?
Dean asked, distrusting. Rebecca nodded. She herself had arrived at that conclusion, but the truth was that she didn't really care.
Yes, that is why they asked or forced me to tell you. You know I'd never keep information from you. They knew you'd distrust their words if they told you.
She fell silent for a second.
I can't really blame them, though. That the shadows are destroyed is of vital importance. They are powerful and dark, destructive. They are actively trying to get rid of that power, even if it means destroying themselves. Like this, they needn't give up their existence, and yet they'd evaporate the shadows. It is the best possible scenario for them. It is only natural that they'd grab onto it. They shouldn't kill because of it,
Cho said, who had been killed by Trigodia and therefore rather sensitive to the subject.
I agree. Like I said, so do most of them. It was rather foolish of them. It is not only your choice if you go on or return as a ghost. Which one of them you choose to help is also your choice. They should not expect an escort anytime soon.
Rebecca sighed and looked around. This place gave her the chills. As a ghost, nearly everyone there gave her dark looks and regarded her as scum. They did not know better. Tracy noticed it too.
They really dislike ghosts, don't they?
Her tone was troubled.
Ghosts aren't really supposed to come here, she said with a voice. I am among the few ghosts who have visited this place twice. It happens that living people arrive here, but they don't tend to stay very long. It is what one calls a near-death experience. This place is a sort of limbo. If you're dead, you make your choice, stay as a ghost or take the stairs.
Rebecca looked up the dark wooden stairs they were standing on with an expression of loss on her face. The staircase looked old and was quite narrow. It was surrounded by high walls with wallpaper in poor condition. She could not see the end upwards, but just a couple of steps beneath her was something that reminded of a basement. She had made sure that she stood between the four nearly died and the basement.
This is a freaky place,
Joe commented lowly, eager to get away.
Don't worry, Rebecca said. Like I said, it's just a limbo. You are only seeing what I saw because you are here on my terms. The moment you make your choice and I leave, you'll see it differently.
She clapped her hands together, she herself eager to get down to business. The staring of the people above them was getting on her nerves.
This is the only moment in your existence which you will spend here. At least I think so. I have no idea what happens when you go up. Perhaps you are reborn and then you will return here eventually. Or when...
Rebecca got herself trailing off topic.
Never mind, the chance of you returning here is slim, especially if you chose to be a ghost. You know your options, pick one. Don't rush, you have all the time. Literally. Are you going to do it?
Tracy asked Rebecca curiously.
Will that affect your choice?
Rebecca retorted.
I've already chosen, Tracy said. I'm helping them. How bad can the place be?
Rebecca shook her head.
You're a fool, but a brave one. Of course I am going to. To me, it isn't even a choice. It's personal.
Then I have little choice,
Dean said and sneaked an arm around Tracy.
if you're going, so am I.
You don't have to if you don't want to.
Tracy told him, his choice of words making her feel guilty.
I saw you die.
Dean said earnest.
That hurt. I'm not leaving you again, and you wouldn't be Tracy if you did not choose to make the selfless choice. So I am coming too. I mean, what the hell? What's life or death without a little adventure? Would be pioneers.
I'm going too,
Luna said with a happy smile. It did not seem to bother her at all that she had been chopped to bits. Literally.
I always wondered if I'd see Mom when I died, but I'm sure she understands.
Rebecca swallowed. She had tried not to pay too much attention to the fact that by becoming a ghost, she had ensured she'd never see her grandpa, parents, or friends again. Truth be told, she was quite glad Dean, Tracy, and Luna had decided to go with her. At least she would not have to do it all alone. Jo looked as if she had been backed into a corner. She looked up the stairs, then at Rebecca, and up the stairs again at rapid pace. Rebecca knew what it meant.
Jo, there is nothing shameful about walking up those stairs if you want. In fact, it is the thing that is expected from everyone who comes here. You are not even supposed to have a choice.
Then, Jo said, her voice shaking,
Then I want to go up there. To the afterlife.
Rebecca made a sort of bow and gestured for her to go up the stairs.
Don't delay, she said kindly. Your future is waiting for you.
Rebecca made sure it did not sound condescending, but encouraging. The last thing she wanted was to give the Asian girl a bad conscience. Jo smiled and walked past Luna up the stairs, and then vanished. Dean and Tracy looked rather perplexed, but Rebecca explained,
She went to a sort of limbo which suits her more. She'll be fine.
Tracy nodded, but still looked rather shocked. This being dead thing was something she'd have to get used to.
Okay, so we're just going? No spectacular happenings? Just walking down there?
Rebecca shrugged.
I'm not sure, but that is where we are going, and the three of you are going first.
Tracy looked at Dean, and they nodded at the same time.
Together,
Tracy said, and took Dean's hand. He smiled and turned his eyes on the concrete floor of the basement. They went down together, pressing close to each other because of the narrow staircase. When they stood on the first step, a figure started to form before them. Dean was about to take a step back, but Tracy's hand held him in place. Have you no regrets? The distinctly male voice whispered before the figure had taken form. Tracy shook her head.
I do not. I want to return as a ghost.
You sound self-assured. How rare. The voice said, speaking slowly as the figure took the form of a fading ghost. One could not even distinguish his facial features. Does your companion share that confidence? The voice of the ghost was hoarse, slow, and low, as if it was rarely used. Dean nodded and put on a stubborn face. Then go, the ghost said. For your courage, I will give you a small gift. Both Dean and Tracy went rather pale. What? Go, the ghost said, and started to fade, for real. In a matter of seconds, he was little else than a gray spot in the air that soon vanished too.
What was that?
Tracy asked and looked at Rebecca.
Just go! You have limited time, and do it one at a time.
Rebecca urged.
I'll explain when we get back.
Tracy went first, soon followed by Dean. The moment they set foot on the seemingly concrete floor, they vanished through it, as if there was nothing underneath it. Rebecca knew for a fact that the concrete floor served as a sort of filter. It removed the ka from one's soul and sent it to the dominion of the beast. That was all it served for. They could not see it, but Dean and Tracy had just taken a step into nothingness. Luckily, they were dead, otherwise the landing would have been rather unpleasant.
What was that?
Luna asked curiously, seemingly having decided she'd have an answer to that before she went the same way.
A very, very old ghost. He's been there since the beginning of wizard kind. When wizards found out they could cling to life, many of them did. So a few ghosts decided to make sure as few as possible made that choice. It is their task to scare people away and tell them that becoming a ghost is an act of cowardice. It is because of them that the amount of ghosts in compare to the amount of dead wizards and witches is rather low.
Rebecca sighed and wondered what it would be like if the ghosts had not asked her to return. She had done like most others, walked straight up, but then 3 ghosts had called her back. She hadn't really wanted to become a ghost, but she had thought about Atem and all the others who had given their lives an afterlife in order to destroy the shadows. So how could she have refused?
They know why we chose to stay,
She added.
What did he mean with gift?
Luna asked curiously.
I'm not sure,
Rebecca admitted.
I have a suspicion, but that's all. We'll see soon enough. Are you going?
Luna nodded and walked down the steps rather casually. She was greeted in much the same fashion, but by a different ghost. This ghost was equally hazy, but taller and slimmer, and the voice was female.
Another one to pass to realms beyond imagination.
Luna nodded eagerly.
Then proceed, child,
she said, her voice clear.
You will be rewarded for your choice.
And Luna took another casual step onto the concrete floor. She too, heavily oblivious that she'd literally fall down to earth. Normally, a ghost wouldn't notice. Rebecca herself did not remember falling, but if her suspicions were correct, they would be very much aware of falling. And now she would be too. She'd never admit it, but the reason she wanted to go last, aside from the fact that she wanted to keep an eye on the proceedings here, was because she was rather scared to jump. She did not want anyone to see her hesitation, and she hesitated enough. When she reached the lowest step, no form appeared in front of her. She just stood there hesitating. Every time she brought herself to take the step, her legs refused. At last, she just closed her eyes and jumped with 2 feet. Then she was falling.
Wakey, wakey! An unfamiliar voice whispered in his ear. That little fact told Harry that whatever had happened after he had been hit with the killing curse, he still had some sort of existence and he was not alone. The thought was oddly comforting, even though the voice had been unfamiliar. Harry looked up, noticing that he did not have any glasses anymore. He was laying face down on the floor, which meant this existence surpassed simple thought. He could also feel. Before him sat a man his own age, tanned with blonde hair. He was wearing a violet shirt and black pants, and oddly enough, he had golden earrings, armbands, and neckbands covering most of his exposed skin.
Who are you? Harry asked, having the strange feeling he had seen this man before.
Put on some clothes before we chit-chat,
the man said, and handed Harry a pile of clothes that included casual underwear and a set of plain black robes. It wasn't until the man pointed out that Harry was not wearing any clothes that Harry noticed it. He gratefully accepted them, not really comfortable with walking around naked, even though he was dead, in the presence of a complete stranger. The man walked away and sat down on a bench that stood in the huge hall and seemed to stare at a random spot. As Harry dressed, he looked around. The place where he found himself was huge, far larger than the Great Hall. It looked a bit familiar, though. Just as familiar as the man who was sitting on something that closest resembled a park bench. Have we met before? Harry asked when he was dressed. The blonde turned back to Harry and laughed out loud.
I know that. You were approximately 10 years old when I died, kid.
Normally, the laughing would have bothered Harry had it not been for the stranger's eyes. They were a rather unusual dark violet color, a colder purple than Professor Muto's amethyst eyes. He was also wearing eyeliner in a fashion Harry had only seen before on Professor Mahad. Now we knew where he'd seen the eyeliner before. It had been on this man. The moment he made the connection to Mahad, he knew who this man was. You're a tomb keeper. I saw you on a picture Professor Muto had. You're one of the Ishtars, Harry proclaimed when he recalled. The man, whose first name Harry did not recall, looked rather amused.
Marik Ishtar, yes. Did you say Professor Muto?
Harry nodded, not understanding why the stranger found that so amusing. Our history teacher, why are you laughing?
Mary could not hold himself. He laughed until he nearly cried. Professor, that can't be. Aura, hilarious. Professor, straight teacher. Wait until I told you, don't you? Professor.
Harry found himself rather lost. Here he was, presumably dead, and someone else who clearly was dead too could not stop laughing because of something in which Harry failed to see the humor. He was not quite sure what he had expected of death, but it certainly wasn't this. He had to admit that he was almost disappointed.
Sorry, Merrick said after collecting himself somewhat. You were probably murdered a couple of minutes ago, and here I am laughing. I think it is not particularly appropriate.
Harry was beyond answering. He just stood there with a rather shocked expression on his face.
There was someone else who was supposed to meet you here. Hasn't shown yet, though.
Merrick said and looked around as if looking for someone.
Well, for the time being, you'll just have to satisfy yourself with me. Not that I have any idea why I am here.
You don't? Harry asked, confused.
Merrick smirked. Of course not. Where do you think you are?
Well, Harry said, surprised by the question. I'm dead, so the afterlife, I take it. He was so doubtful, he made it sound like a question. Merrick shook his head.
This is boring as hell, and I'm a fine judge of that. If this were the afterlife, we'd all commit suicide. No pun intended.
Merrick smirked again.
Anyway, this is what we'd call limbo. In this case, it is your own individual limbo.
Limbo? Harry asked, but forgot all about the tomb keeper when he caught sight of something truly hideous. It had the form of a small, naked child curled on the ground, its skin raw and rough, flayed-looking, and it lay shuddering under the bench directly facing the one Merrick had been sitting on, where it had been left unwanted, stuffed out of sight, struggling for breath. It had been the thing Merrick had been looking at while Harry had been dressing. Merrick did not look amused at all anymore when he noticed that Harry had caught sight of the child.
I don't have much experience with limbos, but I am pretty sure that something like that is not a good sign,
he said with a low voice. Harry knew that the Egyptian was quite right. He was afraid of it, small and fragile and wounded though it was. He did not want to approach it. Nevertheless, he drew slowly nearer, as if spellbound, ready to jump back at any moment. Merrick's eyes followed him cautiously. Soon he stood near enough to touch it, yet he could not bring himself to do it. He felt like a coward. He ought to comfort it, but it repulsed him.
Come back, Harry Potter,
Merrick said, and Harry quickly stumbled away from the being, the spell broken. It's wrong to leave it like that, Harry protested, although he was quite glad to be away from it.
Do you really think so? What are your instincts telling you?
Merrick asked. Harry was silent for a second. That it is dangerous. It scares me. My instincts tell me he doesn't belong here. Merrick nodded with a thoughtful expression on his face.
Exactly. If a camel finds an injured lynx, do you think the camel takes care of that lynx? Would it be wrong for the camel not to heal the lynx?
Harry frowned, not understanding. With Merrick, it seemed wisest to simply reply. Somewhere along the way, he'd understand. Of course the camel wouldn't heal the lion. Why would the prey help the hunter to hunt again? It is the only logical thing to do.
Yet you think we should do something about that?
Merrick asked condescendingly and made a disgusted gesture towards the child. Yes, Harry said, still failing to see the connection. Of course, it's an injured child.
The tombkeeper sighed. The old man was right. You really do think with your heart. If you ask me, a little too much. It's nothing short of a miracle you haven't died earlier, considering your attitude.
What old man? Harry asked. Pretty sure he already knew who Merrick meant.
I'm sure he'll show soon,
Merrick said and waved it away, his eyes still on the flayed child. The whimpering did not seem to affect him. He did, however, thread forward and knelt down at the child's side. You can't do anything, a second voice said, and this one Harry did recognize. He turned around to see Dumbledore stand there, healthy and with a twinkle in his eyes.
I can twist its neck,
Harry believed Merrick muttered, though he could have misheard. He decided he had. The tombkeeper could not have just said that. The tombkeeper stood up and removed himself from the child again, now and then throwing it distrusting and repulsed glances. Dumbledore seemed to decide to ignore the Egyptian. Harry, you wonderful boy, you brave, brave man, let us walk, he suggested, and led them away from the thing on the bench towards a different seat further away, far away enough for them not to hear the sound of the child anymore. Merrick followed them, and since Dumbledore didn't protest, neither did Harry. Dumbledore and Harry sat down on 2 seats next to each other. Merrick found a third seat somewhere, far away enough to show he was not part of the conversation, but easily within earshot. He was also not hiding that he was listening in. He was lying at his seat, his legs thrown over the armrest, hands folded behind his head, and his eyes closed. You're dead, Harry said. It was one thing to meet a dead stranger. To meet someone he knew, Dumbledore, was something completely different. Yes, Dumbledore confirmed with a smile. And so is he,
Harry said, and even that Dumbledore confirmed, although Merrick himself had already done that earlier.
Then, so am I.
Harry had to admit it. He did not really feel that. Dumbledore chuckled lowly.
Who knows? I'm certain Mr. Ishtar has already informed you that this is not the afterlife, but a place in between.
Harry frowned. More or less.
More or less,
Dumbledore repeated with a little laugh. What was up with dead people and laughing?
He called it limbo.
What's limbo? Harry asked. He recalled having asked that question before, but he had not really received an answer, mostly due to himself.
Mr. Ishtar does that better than I,
Dumbledore said, but offered no explanation as to why. Limbo is the place where you chose, Merrick said and opened his eyes. He let his legs slip from the armrest into a more orthodox sitting position. It's where the dead come before they go on. Here is where people are separated from their ka. Limbo is the place where wizards and witches can choose to become ghosts. It is the place where the living are chased from when it is not their time yet. Limbo is a space outside life and death, outside time and space. It does not even really exist. Only the soul can venture here, and everything can happen here. Limbo is also individual. It shapes itself after who you are when you die. Harry frowned. That sounded rather complicated.
Then how can you be here?
Limbo is individual, not personal. Anyone can venture into someone else's limbo, but it doesn't happen often. Actually, it nearly only happens when the dead are supposed to chase away the living who have ventured into limbo. A small smile grew on Dumbledore's lips as he listened, interested, to the Tomb Keeper. Then there are people who share the same limbo. There are limbos that constantly have new souls arriving. It's complicated. We could continue days and days on this subject. Not that we wouldn't have time. Limbo is outside time.
How do you know all this?
Harry asked. Merrick shrugged. I ventured into a few limbos when I was still alive. His tone made quite clear he did not want to talk about it.
So you're here, Harry,
Dumbledore said.
You are not in the land of the dead just yet.
So I'm not dead? Harry asked, confused. Dumbledore opened his mouth to reply, but Merrick beat him to the point. No, kiddo, you're not dead. Had you been dead, me and the old man wouldn't have been here. We dead people are not really allowed to return to Limbo. But Harry raised his hand instinctively towards his lightning scar. It did not seem to be there.
But I should have died. I didn't defend myself. I meant to let him kill me.
And that, said Dumbledore, will, I think, have made all the difference. Happiness seemed to radiate from Dumbledore like light, like fire. Harry had never seen a man so utterly, so palpably content. Explain, Harry said, not caring if it would be the Tomb Keeper or the headmaster who would shed light over all of this. Dumbledore explained. Voldemort had taken his blood and had in that way bound Harry to life. Merrick, who was clearly listening in, had a frown on his face, not understanding everything that had been said. Harry couldn't blame him. He himself found the magic rather difficult to understand.
And you knew this? You knew all along?
Harry asked.
I guessed. But my guesses have usually been good,
Dumbledore said happily. Merrick laughed out loud. It takes quite some guts to guess that someone won't die, he chuckled. What would you have done had you been wrong?
I took precautions. I believe those precautions are the reason you're here right now,
Dumbledore said and looked at the Tomb Keeper with a frown.
Harry, there is something you might want to know.
What? Harry asked.
Everyone who comes here in this manner is here because you want them to. I am not particularly surprised as to why you wanted me here. I believe you still have questions enough. But for some reason you also willed Mr. Ishtar to come. Perhaps you might want to figure out why.
Harry looked taken aback. Had this been his doing? But he never met the Tomb Keeper before, so how could he have? Don't think so straightforward, Merrick said, who had guessed Harry's train of thought and shook his head. Things like this can also occur indirectly. You have a question, or questions, and the person able to answer them gets summoned.
I don't
rush yourself. You have all the time, Merrick said and closed his eyes again. Harry turned to Dumbledore, deciding to ask the questions he did know.
Why did my wand break the wand Voldemort borrowed?
As to that I cannot be sure, Dumbledore admitted. Have a guess then, Harry said, and Dumbledore laughed.
What you must understand, Harry, is that you and Lord Voldemort have journeyed together into realms of magic hitherto unknown and untested. But here's what I think happened. Without meeting you, as you know now, Lord Voldemort doubled the bond between you when he returned to a human form. A part of his soul was still attached to yours, and, thinking to strengthen himself, he took a part of your mother's sacrifice into himself. Having ensured this twofold connection, having wrapped your destinies together more securely than ever two wizards were joined in history, Voldemort proceeded to attack you with a wand that shared a core with yours, and now something very strange happened. As we know, the cores reacted in a way that Lord Voldemort, who never knew that your wand was a twin to his, had ever expected.
Merrick, who had tried to follow the conversation, gave up, stood up, and started walking around. Harry was not really sure if the Egyptian did it consciously or if it just happened, but he moved himself closer and closer to the creature under the bench as he walked in an unclear pattern through the large hall.
I believe that your wand imbibed some of the power and qualities of Voldemort's wand that night, which is to say that it contained a little of Voldemort himself. So, your wand recognized him when he pursued you, recognized a man who was both kin and mortal enemy, and it regurgitated some of his own magic against him, magic much more powerful than anything Lucius's wand had ever performed. Your wand now contains the power of your enormous courage, and of Voldemort's own deadly skill. What chance did that apostate of Lucius Malfoy's stand?
But if my wand was so powerful, how come Hermione was able to break it? Harry asked.
My dear boy, its remarkable effects were directed only at Voldemort, who had tampered so ill-advisedly with the deepest laws of magic. Only toward him was that wand abnormally powerful. Otherwise, it was a wand like any other. Though a good one, I am sure.
Dumbledore finished kindly. Harry sat in thought for a long time, or perhaps seconds. It was very hard to be sure of things like time, here. He killed me with your wand.
He failed to kill you with my wand,
Dumbledore corrected Harry.
I think we can agree that you are not dead. Though, of course,
he added, as if fearing he had been discourteous,
I do not minimize your sufferings, which I am sure were severe.
I feel fine now. An attempt helped me through the worst of it, Harry said.
Merrick did a double take.
Did you say attempt?
Harry nodded, a bit taken aback by the Egyptian's sudden reaction. Yes.
He helped you get yourself killed,
Merrick asked, a bit skeptical.
That doesn't really sound like him.
I wouldn't say he helped me get myself killed. He just walked with me. He told me the battle wouldn't stop even if I died, but that if there was more to it than just, in his words, a foolish attempt to heroism, he would not try to stop me.
Merrick threw himself on his seat with a sour expression. A foolish attempt to heroism.
He looked away somewhere into the distance.
Stupid battle.
Harry stared at Merrick with a rather blank expression. Dumbledore did much the same after having connected the name Atem to the spirit of the puzzle. After a while, Merrick sighed, giving in to the two's silent demands for an explanation.
As Mr. Potter surely knows, I once truly hated the Pharaoh and did many attempts at his life, which failed. He also surely knows that I have suffered from a personality disorder, my alter ego being rather evil. When things got out of hand, I begged at him to kill him, even if it meant killing me. He didn't do it. Never has he ever been willing to sacrifice anyone else, not under any circumstance. That was until now.
He's done it himself, Harry said. Merrick's expression was hard to read.
I know.
How could he? Harry said. How could he do it? I found this nearly impossible. How could he do it on his own device? Merrick looked slightly taken aback, and Dumbledore, too, looked surprised and quite possibly a bit pained.
Desperation, I suppose, Merrick said. When Zark tried to destroy the world, there were only 7 people who stood even the slightest chance of ever defeating the demon, and the ally he had in the Dark Priest. They were the 7 Shadow Wielders. Only 7, but entire armies fought, and they all perished. For all the Pharaoh's strength, he can't take that. When the other wielders and the Egyptian gods failed to defeat him, they were simply lost. And the Pharaoh, the fool he is, blamed himself.
Harry noticed the condescending way the tomb keeper spoke of the Pharaoh, and it amused him, but it was also a bit odd.
To protect those he cares for, the Pharaoh would do anything. He was insane enough to use the Millennium items in order to end the war, even if that meant maiming his soul and memory.
Merrick said with a rather odd expression at Don.
Trust me, when you reach that level of desperation, you too would have done it. Your situations were completely different.
Merrick sighed and stood up again, restless. Harry decided to leave it alone. It had been the question for which Merrick had been present. How could anyone give up their life like that?
Now he had received his answer, so Merrick had served his purpose. Harry turned to Dumbledore. There was only one question that pressed more on him than that of the Deathly Hallows. You asked Professor Muto to come to Hogwarts because you wanted him to finish Voldemort if I were to fail, or if your guesses were wrong and I would have simply died. Dumbledore nodded. Yes, Harry, you must understand. I wanted you to become the end of Voldemort. I really, really do. There is no magic more dangerous to someone like Voldemort than the magic of love that protects you. But once again, I persuaded power. The purely destructive power the spirit possesses seemed like a useful asset to the war. Not even Voldemort, who understands little else than darkness, is a match for the darkness that the spirit, Pharaoh Atam, controls. I am afraid that in the eye of power, the worst of me is presented. Do you think he will be the one to destroy Voldemort in the end? Harry asked. Dumbledore shrugged. I don't know, Harry.
You'll try, Merrick said, but you people have to remember what he is. He is a soul bound to an artifact who needs Yugi in order to exist to the outside world. Yes, he is powerful to an enormous degree, but he is just as vulnerable as anyone else. I too controlled those same powers once, and I got killed by a Death Eater. Don't rely more on him than you rely on anyone else, and remember that his first priority is to destroy the shadows, even if that means your Dark Lord prevails. Merrick's restlessness seemed to increase. Then suddenly he grinned and plopped down on his seat again. Jeez, this whole act like a proper toolkeeper and give the information you are supposed to give in a solemn yet dramatic fashion thing is really something I'll never get used to. They should have said Ishizu. She's a lot better at it. Harry couldn't help but smile. The plan was completely different from all the other acquaintances of Professor Muto Harry had met. He was not so incredibly grave at all times. In fact, he seemed to dislike all the seriousness. Not to mention the first one to condescend to the Pharaoh. It was refreshing somehow. Anyway, where are we? Merrick asked curiously, looking around before turning to Harry. Dumbledore, too, turned to Harry for the answer to that question. Harry said, when he noticed they expected him to know. I believe this is King's Cross Station, but a lot cleaner and less noisy. A train station? Merrick asked and perked up. I've never been to a train station before. Harry failed to comment. I've got to go back, haven't I? That is up to you, Dumbledore said. I've got a choice? Merrick rolled his eyes. Haven't you been listening? This is the place where choices are made. If you want, you can walk straight out of here, stand up and scare the hell out of that Voldemort. You could also board the train, I'd say, and simply go to the afterlife. But technically, it's our job. Merrick motioned towards Dumbledore himself to chase you away from here back to the realm of the living, because right now you are alive and don't belong here. But that doesn't mean you have to listen to us. You can also take the train with me and effectively kill yourself and get the first degree tour of the afterlife. Are you going to take the train? Dumbledore asked and looked with a frown at Merrick. Definitely, the Egyptian called out. Now that I am given the chance, I am going by train. I've never been on a train before. I wonder what kind of train it will be. Harry shook his head, wondering if the tombkeeper perhaps was an illusion. Look, Merrick said, I'm trying to make the best out of my afterlife. And to be fair, I'm doing a decent job. If you take every situation that you face with the depressing severity Atem and Shizu always do, it just doesn't work. I am excited because I'm allowed to finally ride a train. It might seem ridiculous to you, but it's great. It was probably the oddest advice Harry had received for a very long time. But even so, he was grateful. He did not really see the amusement in the situation in which he was in. That was until he imagined Voldemort's expression when it turned out he wasn't really dead. Harry's amusement did, however, not last very long. Voldemort's got the Elder Wand. True, Voldemort has the Elder Wand, Dumbledore echoed. But you want me to go back? I think, Dumbledore said, that if you choose to return, there is a chance that he may be finished for good. I cannot promise it. But I know this, Harry, that you have less to fear from returning here than he does. Harry Potter, the tombkeeper said, if you return to the realm of the living, you burn no bridges. You only take away my chance of riding a train. You will die, no matter what happens, sooner or later. If you go with us, there is a fair chance you will always wonder what would have happened had you gone back. Harry smiled. He liked this place. It was warm and bright and friendly somehow. But he also knew that no matter how much he wanted it, regardless of his choice, he'd never be allowed to stay. I'll go back.
Merrick said and stood up.
Fine, but promise me one thing.
The gamekeeper said, and Harry nodded, wondering if he was already regretting that.
When you do die, please ask me to tag along. I really do want that train trip.